John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to another Commander 2016 deck list. Today we're going to be looking at Open Hostility. Now, if you caught yesterday's video, we looked at the Breed Lethality deck, and it was actually a pretty cool deck, so we'll dive into this one and see how this one looks. Now, before we get started, just a quick reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll see some links to our Amazon affiliate store. If you go in and make any purchases through any of those links, a small percentage does come back to support the channel. It's always appreciated. Also, there's some links to our Patreon page as well. And again, thank you to all our patrons and Patreon that really make these videos possible. Having said that, let's get into today's deck. Now, the Open Hostility deck, as you can imagine, is an aggressive deck, but it's not an aggressive deck in the way that you might first imagine. You think of like big, like trample creatures or something like that. This deck's a little more nuanced. You're actually playing a lot of small creatures and a lot of tokens, a lot of sapperling tokens, as a matter of fact, and then you're finding ways to pump them up and get in for some big lethal attacks. The deck sometimes is a little bit high risk, high reward, but it does do something at least that's very interesting and not just a typical aggressive deck, and I do like that. So, having said that, let's jump into the new cards that we're going to look at today. Now, if you saw yesterday's video, some of these cards are going to repeat, so I'm going to go a little bit faster if we get a card that we talked about yesterday. So if you want my full thoughts on a particular card and you don't get them here, definitely check out yesterday's video. But now we're going to get 15 new cards in this deck, and then of course after that we'll look at the reprints. But let's start by looking at the new commanders. First we have Seskia the Unyielding. This is the 4-color commander for this deck, and this is a perfect commander. I mean, Vigilance and Haste, it's aggressive. You play this, you're going to want to attack. It gives you Vigilance so you don't have any drawback as far as having to worry about the crackback. It has Haste, you can get right in with this card. That's really awesome. So here's what's really interesting though, is that ability. I put this into the battlefield and then I can say, okay, I'm going to choose an opponent. Now, whenever I do combat damage with my creatures to a opponent, then this card is going to go ahead and do that damage to the chosen opponent. So this is kind of cool for a couple of reasons. First off, it's guaranteeing action. It's encouraging you to attack, number one. And number two, it's also getting potentially past somebody with very high defenses. If somebody's just building a wall and you can't get to them, this is a way to get to them. As a matter of fact, there may be cases where an opponent may go along with this and be like, you know what, just attack me with that creature. I'm not going to block. We need to deal with this threat over here, which leads to some interesting gameplay. But one of the things you're going to see as a kind of repeated theme in these decks, as well as we saw in Conspiracy Take the Ground, a lot of cards that are trying to encourage action. Much like the deck we saw yesterday, this is one of your options for a commander, but if you don't want to go this route, you can use 2 partner commanders. So let's look at those. We have Timna the Bloodsower. Now, this is your allied partner. You only have 1 allied partner, but you do get to choose between 2 enemy colored partners. So if you go with the partner route in this deck out of the box, you would have to use Timna. Now, she's only a 2/2 for 4. She does have trample, and there are plenty of ways to make her bigger in this deck, as you can imagine. But what's interesting about her is when she does combat damage to a player, you get to make that many green sapperling tokens. So this is another way to generate sapperlings, which you're going to see is a pretty big theme in this deck. Next we have Ravos Soul Tender. Of course, this is one of the enemy colored partners. Now, he costs a little more at 5 mana, but he's also bringing a lot more to the table. You can't play him as early or as often, but what you get in return is a bigger effect. This is a 2/2 flyer, so again, a small creature, but has an Anthem effect. All your other creatures get +1/+1. Great for tokens, sapperling tokens, and all that. At the beginning of your upkeep, you also can return a target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. After a while, it becomes some nice card advantage. This is actually a really cool card. Does a lot of stuff. A little bit fragile, but it is a commander. You can play it again if he dies, so that's a good thing. Timna the Weaver, and this is a little bit cheaper at 3, and its effect is going to feel a little bit smaller than the previous card, but still good for a different play style. This is another 2/2, so all the partners are 2/2, which is interesting for an aggressive deck, but this is a 2/2 lifelinker. But what's really interesting is this is encouraging you to attack multiple opponents. So here's some incentive to attack more than one person, keep the game moving, keep attacks going, gets people out of the silos, and if you do that, you can pay some life and you can draw some cards. Eventually the lifelink may help you recoup some of that life, but you know what? That's not a big deal. Drawing cards is just a very powerful effect anyway. So if that's the game you want to play, this commander could be the partner you choose instead. All right, let's move on to the other new cards. We have Charging Cinderhorn. Again, talk about a card that's getting people out of their silos, making them attack. First off, it's a 4/2 haste that's encouraging you to attack, but then your opponents are in this weird situation that if they don't attack this turn, they're going to be taking damage. They don't want to do that, right? That just feels bad. So they're going to try to force an attack, and it's going to create action early on and often in the game. And I think it's a great idea to keep these games moving, especially if you're playing these out of the box. Next we have Primeval Protector. Now this looks a little expensive, but keep in mind it does cost 1 less for each creature your opponents control. So that can get pretty low pretty quick. And not only is it a 10/10, I mean 10/10s are good. Even without evasion, I'm okay with a 10/10 because it's doing something. It's going to be a great blocker, or else I can just attack in, make people chump block. It's going to have a presence that's going to be felt. But perhaps more importantly, it's giving all your creatures a +1/+1 token. So it's an Anthem effect, but it's a permanent one. Going to be great for those Saproling tokens for sure, and some of these other small creatures with abilities like the partner commanders we just saw. Stonehoof Chieftain, another card that really plays well with a lot of these small creatures that are going wide in big abundance. This one's an 8/8 trample indestructible, great blocker on its own even, but what's really interesting is whenever another creature you control attacks, it also gets trample and indestructible. So this is great if you're in the later portion of the game, you have other ways to pump your small creatures. This could be a win condition, but what's also nice is even early on, this enables you to attack in with maybe a bunch of Saproling tokens. You don't have to worry about losing half of them, right? They could get blocked, but they're still going to survive. That's kind of a nice way to continue to see action in the game. Now, if something happens to this card at instant speed, that could be a little bit of a risk, but at the same time, it is indestructible, so you have some insurance on this one. Grave Upheaval. I talked about these cards a little bit yesterday, but these new basic land cycling cards are awesome. Like, they're a great way to fix mana, of course, in a 4-color deck. But more importantly for me, I'm kind of tired of playing with all the old basic land cycling cards over and over again, and like every Conspiracy, and like every Modern Masters. So it's cool that they made new ones, right? So hopefully at least maybe Eternal Masters or Conspiracy will be able to see some of these cards come back again, so we're not always playing with the same ones. But anyway, this one in particular is really good. I mean, I don't mind paying 6 mana with the option to land cycle to take a card out of a graveyard, a creature card, and then put it under my control, and also it gets haste too, so it can attack right away. Really cool card. Treacherous Terrain, another good card. If you get this one early, you can land cycle it, fix your mana, but if you get it late, this actually could be a win condition in the late game. I mean, obviously in Commander, by the end of the game, your opponents are going to have a lot of lands in play. You play this, you might be able to take out 2 or even 3 people with this card. Like, this is kind of the real deal. This is a serious card. It's not always going to work out the best for you, I'm sure, but there's going to be times where this could simply win you a game. Divergent Transformations. This one's a Undaunted card, and this is a really good one. I talked about Undaunted yesterday, and it's a really elegant design. I mean, it's a way to take a card and make it powerful in a multiplayer experience, but maybe not so great in the single player games, and that's okay because it's awesome for Commander. This one lets you exile 2 target creatures and basically gives you like a polymorph style effect. So you could maybe get rid of 2 of your Saprolings and get some good stuff out of your deck to replace them with. You can do it at instant speed, which is really awesome. So you can use this as a combat trick. And if you have a creature on your opponent's side that's maybe something you can't deal with, this exiles that creature, so it deals with like indestructible creatures as well. That's awesome. And it lets them then go to their deck and find something else, which hopefully won't be as good. This is a really cool card, very strong. Looking forward to trying this one out. Silvan Reclamation. We saw this one in yesterday's deck as well, so I won't go into a lot of detail here, but I will say another basic land cycling card, and you know what? Very economical for 5 mana. I'd be happy to pay 6 for this. Frenzied Fugue. This is funny because it's a threat effect that just keeps on coming. Like, it's the gift that keeps giving. You put this on a creature and you get to steal it and attack with it, and then you give it back, but guess what? In your next upkeep, to do it again, assuming the creature is still alive, right? That's actually kind of fun and awesome. I mean, I don't know, other than the fact that it is aggressive and it does encourage more aggressiveness, I don't know how it really fits into what this deck's trying to do, but it is really fun. Evolutionary Escalation. This one I'm not super sold on. Like, it's cheap, and yes, giving a creature 3 counters on every one of your upkeep is good. That's what this deck wants to do more than anything. The downside of putting 3 counters on an opponent's creature, sure, at times that can be mitigated by putting on a creature where it doesn't really matter to you that much, maybe like their worst creature. but over time you're starting to put a lot of counters out there on the battlefield for other people, and that feels a little weird to me, especially in the late game when you get down to 1 or 2 people. Now, early in the game you can use it as kind of a political, hey, let's make friends, I'll put some counters on your creature sort of thing, but I do feel like later on, if like your last opponent has like a board sweep or something, that could get really awkward really quick. So I don't know, it just feels like a high risk card for me, and this is probably one of the first cards I'd just switch out for something that's a little more stable and allows me to grow in another way. Conqueror's Flail. This is perfect for this deck. Okay, first off, it's a good card on its own. I mean, it costs 2 to equip, and in a 3, 4, 5 color commander deck, you're getting some value with that first ability. But what's really interesting is the second ability. What this deck probably fears more than anything is combat tricks. Stuff that can happen on your turn when you're trying to go in for like a big alpha strike. This is going to protect you against that, at least to some extent. I really like that a lot. Fantastic inclusion. And finally, our last new card of the day is Ash Barrens. We talked about this one yesterday, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but it is simply a good way to fix your mana. All right, let's talk about reprints. We got a lot of really cool reprints to look at, and this is always one of my favorite parts of this product, to see how deep they go with some of these reprints. First, we have Mentor of the Meek. Fantastic inclusion. I mean, this is perfect for this deck. You're going to be making a lot of sapperling tokens whenever small creatures come into play under your control. If you have the mana, you pay 1, you draw a card. You're going to be drawing all sorts of cards if this stays in play. Hopefully, for their sake, your opponents realize that and deal with this card, but you can run away with the game if no one stops this. Mirror Entity. This could be a win condition. If you ever played with this card before, it's very, very good. You take your mana, you just pump it all in there, and you just increase the power and toughness of all your creatures, just attack in for some big strikes. You could take out a couple opponents with this towards the end of the game. Really, really good. If your opponents are aware how good this card is, they're going to be gunning for it. It is a 1/1 on its own without being pumped, so it is very fragile. But at the same time, this card's awesome, and there are some ways to protect it in the deck. So you could perhaps try to play a little bit of a long game. It's probably better to hold in your hand, though, till you're ready to go in for one of those big strikes. And if you have the equipment we saw earlier, it could be another insurance policy for you. Fantastic card. I will say, as a side note, though, it has Changeling, which is interesting that Murmuring Bosk is not in this deck. We saw it in yesterday's deck, and of course it doesn't come into play tapped if you show a Tree Folk. And there's no Tree Folk in that deck. At least this deck has the Changelings, but I don't know, it didn't make it here. So go figure. Kind of talk amongst yourselves about that one, but just wanted to throw that out there. Brutal Horde Chief. I don't know if you ever played with this card in Fate Reforged, but it's like really strong. Now, it's very cheap for 4. That first ability, like gaining some life and draining, okay, that's fine. The second ability is really, really fun, though. I mean, creatures your opponents control block this turn of Fable, and you choose how those creatures block. So not only can you use this when you're attacking, but you can use this even when other people are attacking. So someone else attacks another opponent, and you can activate this ability. I mean, that's awesome in a multiplayer game, right? So this is fantastic. I love this inclusion. Now, granted, sometimes your opponents can mitigate the damage by tapping creatures that have tap abilities and stuff like that. But still, you're going to eventually get some gains out of this card for sure. Rite of the Precinct 6. This is a card that's like kind of ho-hum in a single player game, but guess what? In a commander game, this becomes very, very good. Now, there's a little bit of a sweet spot for this card because as the game goes on and players start going out, then it becomes smaller again. So you do want to keep that in mind. But for the most part, I mean, you're getting a lot out of 2 mana for this card. Alicia, Who Smiles at Death. This is a good beater. I mean, 3/2 first striker for 3, that's great. Another card that wants to be aggressive. The effect that allows you to take cards out of your graveyard and put them into play is actually pretty good. The only thing you do want to keep in mind, though, is they have to come into play tapped and attacking. So there are going to be times where if you really want a creature back, like, say, the Mentor of the Meek, for example, and you want to get it back, your opponent's probably just going to go ahead and block it anyway and kill it. So you're not really getting it back. But if they're blocking that, they're not blocking something else, so it continues with sort of the aggressive pattern of this deck. Stalking Vengeance. Good card. I mean, it's a little expensive on paper when you look at it. You're getting a 5/5 haste, but that ability is the real deal. Whenever another creature you control dies, it deals damage equal to its power to target creature, and you're going to probably have a lot of tokens that you'll be willing to kind of chump block with and sacrifice over time. Again, if this isn't dealt with, this can deal a lot of damage. Torian Mauler, another changeling card, but more importantly, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may put a +1/+1 counter on this. So it's cheap, you get a 2/2, and again, in a multiplayer game over time, this starts to get larger and larger. Den Protector, hey, it's back again. There's a lot of good cards from the cons block in this set, which I find pretty cool. I think that that was one of my favorite environments, probably at least a more recent Magic. So it's nice to see some of these cards come back. Den Protector maybe being one of the best. On its own, it's an aggressive card. Like, a lot of times you forget that. It has Megamorph, and that first ability makes it very aggressive. But let's face it, we all love it because it's a regrowth effect, right? Mana Gorger Hydra. I don't know if you ever played with this one either in Limited, but it can be quite good. Like, I played with this in a cube, and it was actually awesome. Like, if nobody deals with this card, it gets out of hand fast. Hopefully, again, for their sake, your opponents realize that. But this card is hard to deal with. It gets big fast and has trample. Mycoloth. This one's interesting. I like it because it seems to fit with what this deck's trying to do, but it is a high-risk, high-reward card. Let's say I play this, I devour a bunch of my Saproling tokens in the hope that I'll be getting more Saproling tokens, but if this creature gets destroyed before my next upkeep, guess what? I kind of just hurt my board state and didn't get anything out of it. So that's a little awkward. When it works, it's going to be a great payoff. If it doesn't work, it's not going to feel real good. Again, this is a card that's probably better played towards the end of the game when you're down to 1 or 2 opponents, as opposed to putting it out there when you have like 6 people sitting at the table, right? Again, this is a card that I might want to switch out for something else that creates tokens that's a little less dangerous. Kyrian Explorer, not too much to say about this, basically a color fixing card. I will say, we do have some mana dorks in this deck, but they are all 2 casting costs. So even in the world of Commander, they don't want to give us the 1 casting cost ones right now. Next we have Sakura Tribe Elder. Another great card, costs 2, but this is classic mana fixing. You see this in a lot of cubes. Sylvok Explorer, basically, other than creature type, almost exactly the same as the last card we saw just a moment ago. Thelanite Hermit, a great way to pump your Saprolings, and also a way to make Saprolings, so this is perfect in this deck. So think about that. If you have this in play, as well as your partner commander with the Anthem effect, and the big green creature that gives everything a +1/+1 counter, you got some 4/4 Saproling tokens at that point. So that's one way that this deck can win, but there's other ways too. Thunder Hoof Baloth, and here's one of those other ways. This is a lieutenant card, so we're going a little bit deep there, but this is really good. I mean, it comes into play, it's a 5/5, but if you have your commander, it gets +2/+2, and automatically has trample, but most importantly, as long as you have your commander, all your creatures get +2/+2 and trample. So this is almost like a tiny version of Craterhoof Behemoth, but it's a big deal. This could be a huge win condition. The only downside is, again, you put this down and attack in. If an opponent can deal with this or your commander, then you're probably going to have a bad time, unfortunately. But if you have a way to defend yourself, again, looking back at that equipment we saw earlier, that can really help you out. So keep that in mind for sure. Like, this is an awesome win condition. You just have to be a little bit careful on the timing and when you use it. Another great win condition for this deck, Wild Beastmaster. When she attacks in, granted she's only a 1/1 when she comes into play, but she gives all other creatures +X based off her power when she attacks. So even a 1/1 buff can be good sometimes, but imagine if you play her with a previous card or just any of the other ways they can make cards bigger with this deck, right? Like, this can be a huge blowout and again can be a win condition. Ankle Shanker, another card that's going to give you benefit through attacking, but also another card that your opponents are going to be gunning for. So this one's a 2/2 with haste, so you can get a strike in just kind of out of nowhere, but I'd be very surprised if you're going to untap with this card, especially when there's a lot of opponents at the table. This really cleans up the board state well. Your opponent's got to decide whether they're going to absorb the damage or if they're going to block and basically just sacrifice their creatures to your creatures that are coming at you. This is an awesome card. It did a lot of work for me back in the day in Limited. It tried to cross over a little bit into Standard, didn't quite get there, but very strong card. Selesnya Guildmage. Talk about the perfect card for this deck. Like, this is perfect. Not only does it make Saproling tokens, but it also pumps your team. Like, this is exactly what this deck wants. So, just perfect inclusion. Corozda Guildmage. This is actually really good for 2 mana. I mean, talk about a bear with upside. This has got a lot going on. First off, that first ability sometimes can be really good for you. Giving a creature Intimidate there are times where that won't really help you because it is Commander and there's a lot of colors flying around the table, especially if you're playing these decks out of the box. But there are moments where you'll be able to get by with a big creature, and there's a lot of effects that come out of doing combat damage to an opponent in this deck. So keep that in mind. There's times where you can exploit that. Secondly, though, it helps you make Saprolings, which is perfect as well, especially because it's a sacrifice outlet, and if anyone's going to like destroy one of your creatures with a pinpoint removal spell or something, you have the option, if you have the mana, of course, to sacrifice it and get Saprolings out of it instead. That's pretty awesome. Wilderness Elemental. This is okay in the deck. The only thing I will say about it is it's cheap. It has the potential to have pretty high power. It's got Trample, which is nice. When you attack in with it, though, with 3 toughness, it's probably only going to get in for 1 good attack, and then it will probably die. But if you can pump the power and toughness with some of the other things, then it becomes really, really good. Zerta Druid. I used to really like this card in Dragon's Maze. I mean, it's a good mana dork. It does cost 2, but it is kind of nice that it hits all your opponents for 1 when it taps. So that's a thing. And it's not strong enough to get people really upset with you, I don't think, but it does damage at the same time and also ramps your mana. Iroas, God of Victory. Another good card for this deck. I don't know how often you'll actually get Devotion with this. Probably not very often, but it doesn't matter. Creatures you control have Menace, and you get to prevent all damage that will be dealt to attacking creatures you control. That's awesome. Not to mention this is indestructible, so it's hard to get rid of. So you can attack in with some of those Saproling tokens. Even if they're still 1/1s, you do some damage. You don't have to worry about a bunch of them dying because they're being blocked by larger creatures. They're still going to survive. This allows you to just attack freely, basically. It's a really great card. Dauntless Escort. A nice way to protect against board sweeps. Now, much like the deck we saw yesterday, a board sweep is probably this deck's worst nightmare, right? Like, that and combat tricks are really bad for this deck. You don't want to have to rebuild. Once you've already made a bunch of tokens and you've got them pumped up and all sorts of stuff going on, wiping your board is going to be really hard to come back from. So this is a card that's going to at least protect your creatures from a potential board wipe, or at least keep those board wipes in opponents' hands as long as this is out there. This is just a nice way to kind of defend yourself a little bit. Also, in a pinch, you can give a creature indestructible if there's a combat trick that's unfavorable to you and the creature's very important to you. So there's a lot you can do with this card. Really good inclusion for this deck. Farseek. This is the first sorcery of the reprints we'll look at, and this is interesting. You can get a Plains, Island, Swamp, or Mountain, but unfortunately the deck doesn't really take advantage of that because it doesn't have like any shock lands or anything like that. But kind of is what it is. If you upgrade this deck, this card becomes a little bit better, but you know what? On its own, it's still really good because it's mana fixing in a 4-color deck. You'll be happy to have it. Same thing with Rapid Growth. Great mana fixing. Shamanic Revelation, fantastic for this deck. Maybe you'll gain some life, but more importantly, you could be drawing a lot of cards. I mean, imagine having some Saproling tokens and then drawing cards based off the number you have. That could be crazy. Be careful not to deck yourself, but this is really cool. Clan Defiance. This is the first time I think we've seen this card kind of in its modular form, but it looks really good. The rules text on this, I think, feels cleaner. But yeah, it's a great sorcery. I mean, it deals damage to a creature with flying, a creature without flying, as well as a player. So very good card. It does a lot of stuff for the amount of mana you decide to pour into it. Lavalanche. This is interesting because it basically decimates one player. Like, this is great if you're just down to one other player. You can really mess them up pretty bad, not only by hitting them but also hurting their board state. But at the beginning of the game, this is going to be awkward. This is going to be a weird draw for you, so kind of is what it is, but definitely can do some work at some point during the game. Grab the Reins, maybe one of my favorite threaten effects. Let me tell you, I love threaten effects, number one. Number two, I love instant threaten effects. Like, those are my favorite. You don't see those all the time. Sometimes they cost a lot when you do see them, or else they're in 2 different colors or something. But they're awesome because you can use it as a combat trick. But finally, my favorite thing in the world is when you can also sacrifice the creature you steal. This card brings all that to you. It's awesome. One of my favorites probably of all times to play in formats like Commander, but you know what? I'm going to steal your creature. I can do it at instant speed if I need to defend myself. And oh, by the way, then I'm going to sacrifice it and throw the damage at something. Yeah, that's awesome. Now, granted, you do have to pay the Entwine to get all of it, but it's a phenomenal card. I love Grab the Reins. we have a split card, Order and Chaos. Now, if you're having a good day, you're playing the Chaos side. That's what this deck wants to do. The Order side's fine in a pinch if you're in trouble, but really, you want to play Chaos. Utter End, good answer card to just random things that could happen. It can deal with a Planeswalker, it can deal with an indestructible creature, it can deal with an enchantment, an artifact. Just kind of nice to have something like this available to you. Terminate, of course that will destroy a creature, can't be regenerated. Artifact Mutation. Not only do you destroy the artifact at instant speed, but guess what? You get yourself some Saproling tokens, exactly what this deck wants. Boros Charm. You're actually going to see a number of the charms in here, and they're fantastic because they're versatile. And in a few moments, we're also going to see a card that actually lets you search up some instants. So talk about versatility. If you have that card in play, you have a lot of tools you can go and get. Boros Charm, maybe one of the better charms. A fantastic inclusion. Aura Mutation. This time you get to destroy an enchantment, and guess what? You get Saproling tokens, so it's perfect. Crackling Doom. Now, this was a great one-on-one card. This is even better in a multiplayer situation. It does 2 damage to all opponents. Okay, that's fine. But more importantly, each opponent has to sacrifice basically their biggest power creature on the battlefield. That's a big game. Now, the only downside is it's probably going to get everyone real upset at you. So you have to think about the timing of when you play this card and how it's going to unfold long term. But if you play this especially towards the end of the game, this will be very strong. Abzan Charms. Here's another one of the charms. Again, they bring a lot of versatility. Naya Charm. Exact same thing here. Blind Obedience. This is an interesting inclusion for me. I don't know. I just don't feel like it's a big enough effect in a multiplayer game. Like maybe one-on-one it's okay. I like Extort, but only having one Extort effect in the deck isn't super exciting. Like I like that more in multiples. So I don't know. This feels just a little tame for what you'd see in a Commander game. Now it does help against some big decks that are trying to do big plays. I mean, there are times where you're going to see some sort of combo go off where a whole bunch of tokens are being poured onto the board or something, where this will all of a sudden become a great card. But I don't know how often you'll see that, quite honestly, especially if you're playing these out of the box. So I don't know, this is one of those cards you can probably switch out for something else. Breath of Fury. Just another card that feels a little clunky to me. Like, yes, if I'm attacking an opponent that has no way to defend themselves, this card's awesome, especially with all my Saproling tokens, right? You basically just keep attacking over and over and over again until they're out of life. But let's face it, I don't think that's always going to happen. I mean, even if you put this thing on a indestructible creature or something, I mean, it can be chump block, that's going to break the chain. If you can make something unblockable, kind of like the Golgari Guildmage we saw earlier, if you can pull that off, then this becomes a lot better, but that feels very situational. So I don't know. Again, this is probably one of those cards I'd think about replacing. Beastmaster Ascension. Okay, this is a huge win condition, but it is a little skill intensive. You have to think about this card a little bit. If you just play this like on turn 3 and just figure I'll eventually get counters on it, it's probably not the way you want to go, because you will add counters, but probably once you get up to like 7 counters, your opponent's going to deal with it, or one of your opponents is going to be able to deal with it. This is a better late game play when you're going in to make some big alpha strikes, maybe even take out 1 or 2 opponents at the same time. You can put this down for 3, attack in with all those creatures, those Saproling tokens, and as long as you're attacking in with 7 or more creatures, then they're all going to get the bonus, and it's just going to happen kind of at lightning speed before your opponents can really react to it. Now, if they have an answer to that, well, that might slow you down a little bit, but at the same time, at least maybe it just got countered instead of actually putting it out on the battlefield, getting all the counters up, and then having it destroyed before you can do anything with it, right? It's less of a commitment, if nothing else. So this is really good. Again, if you can protect yourself, this is where that piece of equipment really comes into play again. This can be a huge play for you. This is a big game card. Everlasting Torment. This one's fine if somebody has a lot of life gain. Players can't gain life, damage can't be prevented. It is interesting, all damage is dealt as though its source had Wither now. That does count for everything, not just your creatures. Keep that in mind. I don't know. It seems fine, but again, I don't know if it's always going to be that exciting in this deck. Necrogenesis. This is good for a couple of reasons. First, you're going to make some Saproling tokens. Secondly, it clears out creatures in graveyards, which a lot of times that will matter in Commander. So I don't know if it will matter much with these decks in particular out of the box, but just in general with Commander, it's a good thing to be able to do. All right, let's move on to the artifacts. Now, a lot of these are going to be mana fixing, like this one, Commander's Sphere. And this one, it's great fixing, and later on, if you don't need it anymore, guess what? You can sacrifice it and draw a card. Felwar Stone, one of the classic cards from the Dark, one of my favorites, and it's really good in Commander. There is a little variance considering maybe the color you need is not on the battlefield, but that's going to be relatively rare, I think. Gruul Signet, so you do get a Signet here as well. Lightning Greaves, a great Commander card. You see this played all the time. I will say this, though. It has Shroud, not Hexproof, that it gives the creature, so don't forget that. That's very important sometimes. Skull Clamp, talk about a great inclusion for this deck. Again, you're making a lot of Saproling tokens. Put this on a token early on, let it die, draw the card, wash, rinse, and repeat, right? So early on, this is a great way to draw a lot of cards. Now later on, when your Saprolings are bigger, this becomes not quite as good, but that's okay because hopefully you're winning the game at that point anyway, right? This is really about enabling your deck to get going in the early portion of the game. Soul Ring, of course, classic card, one of the most powerful cards ever printed. So glad that they keep including these in this product. I think they're just very important cards. Can't imagine how expensive they'd be if they didn't keep reprinting these. Sun Forger. Now, this is the card I was alluding to earlier. You can basically grab almost every instant. I think every instant except maybe one, I believe, out of your deck fits the requirements. And you have so many of the charms that have all the modules on them. You can just find almost any answer you need to at any given time, and that's awesome. And not to mention a +4/+0 bump is not a bad thing either. All right, let's move on to some non-basic lands with Caves of Koilos. This, of course, being a enemy-colored Pain land, and you can see a wide variety of dual lands here for mana fixing. There's actually a lot of them in this deck. You get a Command Tower, which, of course, is not always included in these Commander decks, but most of the time, fantastic for fixing. Dragonskull Summit, great buddy or check land as they're referred to. Evolving Wilds, fantastic way again to fix color. Exotic Orchard, kind of like the Felwar Stone of lands. Grand Coliseum, this one's really cool. It does come into play tapped, but it's basically like a pain land for any color. Really good inclusion. Gruul Turf, bounce land from the original Ravnica. Jungle Hollow, okay, maybe not super exciting, but it gives you 2 different color mana, so we'll let it pass. Carplusian Forest, this one's a pain land again. Mosswort Bridge, they actually include 3 of these hideaway lands. This is the first one that we'll see, and they're all actually really good in this deck. You'll be casting some cheap spells for sure with these. Now, all of them, including this one, not super hard to pull off, I don't think, with this deck. Nomad Outpost, 3 color option there. Orzhov Basilica, another bounce land. Rootbound Crag, another check land. Savage Lands, another 3 colors. And we get another hideaway land with Spinrock Knoll. Again, very, I think, easy to pull off in this deck. Sandstep Citadel, 3 color option. Another check land with Sunpetal Grove. Terramorphic Expanse, basically the same as Evolving Wilds. And our last non-basic land is Windbrisk Heights. Again, another hideaway land. Very, very easy, I think, to activate in this deck. Having said that, let's look at our basic lands. I mentioned this yesterday, but they are by Rebecca Guay, Kev Walker, and Mark Poole. They look incredible. You'll get 3 plains, 3 swamps, 5 mountains, and finally 5 forests. So that's the deck list. Here's my quick thoughts on the deck. I think I kind of like yesterday's deck a little bit better, the Breed Lethality deck, just because it just felt a little more, I don't know, nuanced, like there's just a little more going on with all the counters and stuff. This deck seems fun, but I would want to make more tweaks to this one. Like, I do feel like a lot of the win conditions are a little bit high risk, high reward, and maybe it was meant to be that way for the aggressive style of the deck. I would want some more stable win conditions, or also I think I'd want some more ways to pump my creatures too in this deck. There's a few kind of random cards like the Blind Obedience. They probably could come out for something else. It'd be a pump spell or something like that. Also, even one-time pump spells like Giant Growth effects, you don't really see a lot of those here. They would be fine with like the Beastmaster, for example. So yeah, I think there's room for this particular deck to grow for sure. But as a shell, an idea, as a concept, I do really like it. Maybe not as much my personal playstyle as the deck we saw yesterday, but I still think this could be really fun, and I really do want to try it out. It looks like there's some cool interactions for sure in here. So having said that, those are my thoughts. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments below on this deck. And tomorrow we'll be back with the Unity deck. And of course, we have 3 more decks, so we'll be looking at one each of the next 3 days. So until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality content for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't yet had a chance to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.